Director of Athlete Ally. And Hudson, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Um, we've had the opportunity to work together a little bit at USA Wrestling through our coaches tab and the educational resources tab. We had added the Athletes Ally training course, which is just an amazing course. I've gone through it about 4 times myself because you can't get enough, and you're never going to learn it enough the first time. So thank you so much for that resource that I know folks can go to right now on our website and jump in. But if I can start a little bit, how did you get into the sport of wrestling? You're a 3-time Division I All-American, a third, and a fourth at the big show. Not a lot of those folks running around, by the way, so that's pretty cool. How did you get into wrestling, and what's always been the love that you've had that's kept you involved?
Great. So I started wrestling when I was 6 years old. I grew up in New Jersey. I think at the time it was I was a kid with too much energy, and it was just kind of a space to make sure that I went to bed on time at night. And I'd say from 6th grade, from being 6 years old up until 4th grade, I wasn't like a world beater. I did the tournaments. I slowly started to build a group of friends that were also wrestling. I started to have my own goals of hey, I would love to be a state champ, and so you slowly start to see yourself in the sport, and you start to have aspirations more and more. But I was by no means like the best of the best. I think, my early relationship with wrestling and why I love it today and sort of loved it as a child is, I think my dad really allowed me to have a relationship with the sport that made me a student of the sport. I had a very healthy relationship with losing. I looked at losing as a positive thing, as a lesson. And growing up, I was the years and times when I became better at wrestling, I was entering into 2 different age groups in local tournaments. And so I would do okay against kids my own age, and then I would go up an age group and just get completely destroyed by older wrestlers. And I actually think that was some of the healthiest sort of education that I had in my upbringing as a wrestler, because I think, in any kind of combat sport, it is such a direct confrontation with your ego when you get physically beaten by another human being. There's no one to point to blame other than yourself. And I think that can be really, really hard. And I think it's partially why in the sport of wrestling in particular, it's hard to retain kids in the sport for, all the way through. I think it's why we see great high school wrestlers that go on to a college environment and just don't perform. The relationship with your ego and with loss and with adversity is not taught equally. Is not, everybody's not on that same level of being able to handle defeat. And so I think for me, I always had just a really healthy relationship with that. I was always hungry to compete, not happy to lose, but saw it as a necessity to accomplish my goals. So I did a lot of wrestling all the way through, but I think that initial framework really helped me have some future success.
Were your parents, was that an intentional environment that they put you in with this relationship with losing and understanding the educational value of that, and maybe not pushing you until you were ready? Was that intentional by them, or did they just kind of happen?
Yeah, I think my dad was kind of a Jedi in, look, it's tough to wake up at 5 a.m. and drive 4 hours to the middle of Pennsylvania to go to a tournament, and you'll get a couple matches, that's tough for any kid. And my dad always, kind of did this Jedi mind trick on me where he was like, we don't have to go if you don't want to. It's completely your choice, right? And of course, that inner dialogue is like, well, no, now I want it. Now I want to go. Let's do this. But I always felt like my relationship with my sport was my choice. That if I didn't want to keep wrestling, I didn't have to. And so as a result, it just kept me in the driver's seat of my own ambition, which I think a lot of wrestlers that I grew up with And I think, you get that crossroads of like, am I doing this for me? Am I doing this for my family? Am I doing this for a scholarship? Like, why am I participating in the hardest sport in the world? What's this all about? And and I think that my dad was really intentional about um, creating the space to always keep my relationship with wrestling on my own terms, and that was invaluable to me.
That's awesome. You took this on to a pretty high level. I mean, you had a chance to go pretty much anywhere you wanted at the collegiate level with the success that you'd had and with the quality of person too, right? I know we recruit at the collegiate level for talent, but I know a lot of these college coaches, they don't want just anybody on their campus. So they want people that have character and can communicate as an adult in a tough adult world, in a tough sport. As you're transitioning into that college world, um, how did that love that you had for wrestling help you? Because I know part of it was the academics at Maryland fit your goals, but where was that love of wrestling to take you to that college level?
Yeah, so going it actually starts very at a much younger age because where I grew up in a place in New Jersey that was not strong in wrestling, right? So it wasn't a wrestling town. Wrestling wasn't cool. It was a soccer town. And so at a very early age, I was my own person. I wasn't gaining friends because I was getting better at my sport. Everyone was kind of like, well, what is that? Like, I don't even know what wrestling is. And so as a result, not only was I kind of following this wrestling path, but I also started to like participate in the choir and in the arts. And I started to find interests outside of my sport, which became really important to me and were things that kind of gave me that sport life balance that kind of kept me centered. And I went to Blair Academy. I boarded there for 4 years, and I participated in the theater in at a season every chance I could get. I was in the choir. So um, when it came time to like think about where I wanted to pursue my goals in college, it you know my life outside of wrestling was really important to me. And I this is an assumption that I had. I don't know if it's true or not, but as a young wrestler, I think that look, being a Division I athlete requires unprecedented amounts of time and commitment. And I think that there are some programs which really intentional about creating space for you to have an identity and a life outside of your sport, and other spaces where I didn't feel like that was going to be possible. Where it's like, this is the system, like you better follow the letter of the law. And look, I mean, I never won a national championship. And so I look back and I'm like, wow, like had I gone to a space with a different culture and a different system, would I have had accomplished different things in the sport? So there is that, like, those questions that I think any athlete will ask themselves. But in terms of why I ended up choosing Maryland, Pat Santoro was the coach there at the time. I love the idea of building things, of leaving a legacy. And Pat was very much kind of sold me on that belief that like we could build something here that is special and unique and different. And you're not going to be just another name on a list. You're gonna be responsible for what comes next in a fundamental way. And so that was really appealing to me. And it was also a school where I genuinely thought that I could pursue the arts and theater. And so I started at Maryland as a theater major and a music minor in vocal performance. And I was like, okay, I this is a space where I can do both. Um, yeah, so that was, and it was, not too close to home that my parents couldn't just drop in on me, but far, but but close enough that I could go home if I needed to. So it's kind of also that right distance from home that also was really appealing.
That's really, and that could be different for everybody, right? Somebody might want to stay, hey, I'll live at home while I go to college. Somebody who might say Russia wouldn't be far enough, to get away. And that's
Yeah,
tough. It's tough to hear when people want to get that far away, unless it's out of their own love for,
yeah.
exploring.
And I think that, looking back, I really feel like at the Division I level specifically, and I'm sure it's true in D2 and D3 as well, you get back what you put in. And I really think that the quality of coaching and the commitment of the athletes is such that you can be successful anywhere if you really just commit yourself. Now there are some spaces where you're going to have to work harder, be more intentional, be more disciplined. There are other spaces where they really have that culture and that system built, but um, you know, I really to each their own, right? Everybody's environment that is going to be right for them to thrive is different. And it just so happened that I think Maryland was a space that felt right to me. But absolutely, I mean, there's so many different sort of blueprints of success that an athlete can try to emulate.
You mentioned the environment where people can thrive. So now you're in college, you're a theater major, you're on the wrestling team, and there's two different worlds that you're living in, and you saw that those two worlds didn't necessarily communicate in the same ways. What happened there?
Yeah, so I mean, look, when you grow up as a wrestler, you there's a way in which we learn to speak, to act, and a lot of that language is at times homophobic, it's sexist. We make jokes, we put each other down. There's this um, you know this phrase, iron sharpens iron, and obviously in the wrestling room, iron sharpening iron all the time. But I think that as wrestlers, we're taught to say things and do things in an effort to kind of like create a culture and build camaraderie that is actually really problematic. And I wasn't really aware of that all that much, but once I went to Maryland, and my first semester freshman year, I was in theater class, and there was this kid named Matt who sat to my right. And about 5 minutes before class started, Matt stood up, took a deep breath, and said, "Class, I have an announcement. I'm gay." And there I was, like, oh my gosh, like I'd never seen anybody come out before. Nobody in my wrestling world had ever come out. And so it was just like there was this silence that kind of fell over the room. We're all kind of like very nervous, not sure of what to say or how to react. And then in the back of the classroom, there was this one person who had that perfect timing, who stood up and then started the slow clap. And I was like, oh, first of all, I was like so upset. I was pissed that it wasn't me. That like it's like, oh man, like that was my chance. But the next thing I know, the entire class is standing and clapping and giving Matt high fives and hugs. And it was clear that this kid was taking a very personal yet public step to being truer to himself, and it required a tremendous amount of courage. And he was treated with dignity, with kindness, with respect, and it was honestly like a really cool thing to just see. And and then that afternoon, to walk back across campus, to go back into my locker room, back with my brothers, my teammates, the people who I just share every moment with, and to hear that same kind of language, those same jokes, kind of made me question, like, if that had happened in our locker room on my wrestling team, would we have started the slow clap? I mean, I'd like to think so, but if you were to actually try to guess based on our actions, you would absolutely not think that we would be supportive, that it would be a welcoming space. And that just made me again like question everything about my role as an athlete, as a leader. um, you know like, sport is a place that's built on diversity. The most successful programs are the ones uh, that allow and create space for diverse talents to thrive, right? No team is going to be successful at the most elite level if everybody comes from the same exact town. We require diversity of talent. And kind of this experience that I had in theater made me realize that we are hurting our wrestling community by not being more proactive, be more intentional about the way in which we speak to and about one another. That there are athletes out there, specifically gay athletes, who are not participating in sport to begin with, or quit the sport far sooner than they ever have the chance to win a national title, right? And it also made me realize that I was responsible. that ultimately the culture of our communities doesn't define us, we define it. We can make our cultures whatever we want them to be based off of how we behave. And so that was sort of my beginning aha moment of like, wow, like I need to really think about this and really think about what kind of role I want to have as a captain of my team, as a SAC rep, as an All-American. I really believe that every athlete is like, we own our histories, right? Whatever we do or don't do, there are no do-overs. So we have to own the history of our programs, of our teams, and that includes the bad. And so if there's ways in which we're behaving that are isolating or excluding or hurting anybody, that's a part of, we're responsible for that. That's a part of our history. We own that. So that was the kind of my aha first step. I should say I wouldn't have called myself an ally or an advocate. I think it's for anybody who starts to speak out on issues of discrimination. It's a slow, steady process, right? It's not like you're going to wake up tomorrow and be like, all right, I'm ready to do this, right? And so for me, throughout my college career, it was actually a very slow process of getting more educated, really becoming more comfortable and confident in the things that I believed in, until, finally, like my senior season, there was this sort of like catalyst moment, which sent me on this completely different path to where I am today.
Wow. I had somebody say one time that you gain trust in drops and you lose it in buckets. So it makes sense that it takes time and intentionality, right? If we're not talking about this, if we're not educating ourselves about this, if we're not having discussions and including others, then we're stuck where we're at.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you decided to make a symbol to be able to share your feelings. Probably a little scary, maybe?
Yeah.
At first. What happened?
Yes. So my senior season, I started the season, I think, ranked number 2 in the country in my weight class, trying to win that national title at 197 pounds. And I really realized that like my ability to affect change was tied to my time as an athlete, right? The moment that you retire, you stop participating in sport, there are fewer eyes watching, right? You have a slightly reduced ability to affect change. And so, even though wrestling's not the biggest sport in the world, we have a community, we have a fan base, I have teammates, and I felt like it was my responsibility to try to do what I felt I could do to make my team and my community a little bit more respectful, a little bit more welcoming. And so I decided to start, my senior season by wearing an LGBTQ equality sticker on my headgear. Probably a compliance violation, but we'll just save that for a different day. No, I mean, but it was like just kind of like, honestly, somebody came up to me on campus with a clipboard that says, "Do you support equality?" I said, "Yes." They gave me this sticker. I didn't have a car at the time, so I was just like, "Hey, I would look pretty cool in my headgear." And honestly, I wouldn't be talking to you today if that hadn't happened, because this sticker fundamentally changed my life. I mean, my goal was, I was going to try to train to make an Olympic team, become a wrestling coach, like kind of have that wrestling life and path. And if it weren't for that sticker, like I'd be in a completely different place. So anyway, I wear this sticker. It obviously starts a lot of difficult dialogue with my teammates. We get in some heated exchanges, but I'm at a place in my career and in a position of leadership on the team where I'm ready for those conversations. I'm, not shy about the way in which I think my team should be treating each other and speaking about one another. And I'm okay to kind of hold that line. But then a few other things happened. So one day after practice, one of my coaches pulled me aside and said, "Hudson, I see you wearing this sticker. Would you be willing to do an interview about why you're an ally, about why you care?" I said, "Sure, of course, no problem. Absolutely. Happy to help." I would find out later that coach of mine was closeted and was not out at that time. And so that I think even made this more personal in a particular way. But then I did that interview, and one of the things that's still so important to me is that progress doesn't occur unless we talk to one another, unless we actually engage in dialogue. And so whether you agree or disagree with anything I'm saying, nothing changes if we don't talk about it. So being the kind of idealistic college kid that I was, I asked this article, the interviewers, if they would share my email address with the article. Please just put it in there, encourage people to write to me. Let's talk about this. Let's just have a dialogue. Well, I wasn't ready for the response. About 2 days after that article posted, I opened up my email and I had about 2,000 emails from closeted athletes from across the country.
Wow.
Who wrote to me and said, Hudson, I just read this article and I'm going to try out for my wrestling team. I've been really afraid to do so, but you gave me the courage to try out. I'm going to go into the locker room and not be afraid. I'm going to start standing up and speaking out as an ally in support of my gay brother or my lesbian sister or my transgender friends. And parents of LGBT kids saying like, hey, I'm an athlete. I don't know how to talk to my LGBT kids about this, but now I have a way to open the door and have a conversation. And, email after email after email, I was just like bawling, reading these messages that were sent to me because my sport has been my entire life, right? Started wrestling when I was 6. So wrestling has given me everything. It's opened every door for me. It's given me my every opportunity, my friends. It is so central to my my character, right? Like all the things that, like the time that you put into wrestling, you get back in character. And these emails just made it clear that there's an entire population out there that is being denied those same opportunities, right? That never get the chance to love sport, participate in sport, to have a home and a family in the way that I did. And that is a tragedy that is playing out in every middle school, in every high school, and every college campus in the country. And it's a shame. It's a shame. And it upsets me. It still upsets me. Because again, I love sports. I think that every kid should be able to thrive in whatever sport they want to pursue. And if there's a group of kids that is not participating or doesn't feel like it's a safe space or doesn't feel like they can be themselves in an environment, I don't know, that culture is causing LGBTQ youth to have higher rates of obesity, higher rates of drug and alcohol use, higher rates of suicide ideation. It leads to greater rates of bullying. So it's actually causing harm in ways that are, I think, really shameful and unfortunate. But it also got me thinking, if I could get 2,000 emails as a wrestler for wearing a sticker, something that took me 2 seconds, imagine if I had been a football player or a team or a league or, a company, and that made me realize, this impact could be exponential, right? That if we could actually educate and organize more allies to care, to show up in thoughtful, strategic ways, it could save lives, it could change lives, it could transform the culture of sport very quickly. And so the genesis of Athlete Ally was based on a really simple belief that there's never been a successful social justice movement for a minority group without the support of the majority. That if we're serious about ending any form of oppression or discrimination, it can't just be the responsibility of those people who are impacted by it, who shoulder the responsibility of ending it. And so I really believe that it's incumbent upon all of us to use whatever we can to make our spaces more welcoming for the people in it. And so that was what set me out on this Athlete Ally journey. And that was 2011. So I've spent the last 9 years talking to coaches, athletes, administrators, trying to build this organization to make sport everything we know it can and should be.
I've been reading a book by Roger Fouts. It's called Next of Kin. And it's a child psychology through his research in the chimpanzee sign language. And
Cool.
He says we learn by observation and imitation. And what you did by creating that better environment is what your dad had done for you. he had intentionally created an environment for you to thrive as a youth wrestler and as a child. And you learned from him, probably, right? And then you imitated him in your adult life by helping to create a better environment for those people that you love and care about. And I think if I'm a child that has grown into life where maybe I didn't have a father or a role model who allowed inclusivity in my life and maybe preached some maybe more negative thoughts about people that are different, how does that change? And if I'm that person that, yeah, I grew up and I didn't have that fostered environment, but I'm starting to learn about this, and I'm starting to understand that everyone should have rights. And if I don't speak up, that I'm part of the problem really now. And my voice is important. What do we say to those folks, right? I've been through that negativity, but I'm not sure that that was right. And now I want to move in a different direction.
Yeah. Well, this is why I think the work of Athlete Ally is so like important but potentially powerful, is that we're trying to speak to and about the culture of our teams, right? And so regardless of where you're coming from, regardless of where your beliefs, your apprehensions, I think everybody can agree that sports should be a place where every athlete can maximize their potential, right? And that we can, if we talk about what we're for instead of what we're against, we can find common ground, right? And
I don't hate to tell me more about it. If we talk about what we're for as opposed to what we're against, could you talk? What is that?
So if I'm like, I think we all agree that people should be kind to one another, right? Like, I think we can agree that there should be a way in which, like, you don't need to use certain types of language to put somebody down. Like, I think that this is like, it's not necessarily allyship, but I think there are like kind of like manners or basic tenets of respect that anybody can commit to, regardless of how you feel about the person sitting across the table from you, right? And so I know that when it comes to the LGBTQ community, not everybody feels equally educated. I know that there are faith-based communities that may not support the LGBTQ community. And I know that there are faith that, I grew up going to FCA camps and definitely was in faith-based environments that were not that supportive of the LGBTQ community. And, look, I don't think I or anyone else is in a position to necessarily change your beliefs, right? Like, I would love to tell you why I think, you should believe this or that, but at the end of the day, we're all going to believe and feel what we feel. However, when we're on a team and in an environment and working towards a collective goal, I think there are ways in which we can all agree to act and treat each other and behave that makes us better, makes us stronger. And so that's why, again, bringing it back to sports, I think, bringing it back to sports, we can all find very specific ways in which we can show up for allies that feels right for us. And so, like, in a lot of our work, the sort of fundamental building block of an inclusive culture, I think, is defining your core values as a program. If you don't have clearly defined core values, it's difficult to actually have something to measure your conduct against. As a coach, like at every team of which I was a part, my coach would say to me, and I think every coach says to their athlete, you represent this program both on the mat and off. When you're walking through the halls, when you're out on the weekend, you are still a representative of what we stand for. However, having talked to lots of coaches now, there are not a lot of coaches that actually define what those values are, right? And, I'll go to a room of coaches. How many of you have clearly defined core values? A lot of hands don't go up. Okay. Even those that do, I then talk to their athletes later that night. Hey, do you have core values? What are they? Blah, 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 blah. So I think there's a huge disconnect around who are we? What do we believe in? And I think more coaches need to define those things very intentionally, very explicitly, because at the end of the day, the work that I'm doing, this conversation is not about trying to change, but not to say like this is right, this is wrong, but trying to align on who we are as a team, as a community. And I think that our core values, like for me, it's the two most important core values are really like respect and accountability, right? That we have respect for one another and we're accountable for our actions. And I think if we agree to some of those fundamental tenets of our culture, it becomes so easy to then address things that lack respect and things which lack accountability. And so the why, like ultimately we have to align on why this is important and what you need to do about it. And I think it starts with our core values. I don't know
So
if that answers your question.
yeah,
But.
absolutely. And because if I'm the coach and I see an issue happen between two athletes, and it's a lack of tolerance, it's a hurtful comment, it's those things.
Yeah.
When that occurs, I don't have to say, knock it off, shut up, quit saying. I don't have to take in a negative approach. I can say, hey, how does that comment that you made, because I love you, how does that comment you made carry on our core value of respect?
Exactly.
And how does that stand up for accountability in that world of respect? And then if the athlete goes, well, I guess it doesn't. Okay, they're learning. They're required to think about how their actions affect others, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, everybody's on a journey to greater understanding about so many different issues, the way in which we can treat each other better. And I think it's important to adopt language and tactics that help people on their journeys, right? So look, having used homophobic language, laughed at homophobic jokes, like I'm not gonna cast the first stone and say like, hey, that like, I get it. I get that we're a part of this culture that teaches us these things, right? I learned it from somewhere, and today's athletes are learning it from somewhere. But I think the way in which, again, we can kind of stop it and pivot and be better is again kind of by defining those core values. Those become such easy interventions when bad things occur, because now when an athlete uses a homophobic slur, I don't need to give a speech which I might not feel completely comfortable talking. Like I know a lot of coaches say I can't even say LGBT comfortably, right? Like there are some coaches who I think a lot of coaches who just were not well versed in a lot of different areas. But I think we can all identify if something's not respectful, if something's not inclusive, if something lacks accountability or honesty, right? Like, so and so then when those bad things occur, being able to say, hey, you know, respect all, fear none, or like whatever your value is as an institution, whatever that slogan is, I think it's invaluable. I think it really helps change behavior, and again defines who we are as a program and what you're working for. There's a great book called The Culture Code, and it talks about kind of inclusive cultures, high performing cultures, and it says that all environments that perform well, all cultures that perform well have three things in common: align on purpose. What are we here for? What are we working towards? Really share those big dreams, those big goals, and commit to them. Build safety. So make sure that every athlete feels like they have a home, that they are supported, that they are loved by you and their teammates. And then third is share vulnerability. Actually create a space in which it's okay to say, hey, I made a mistake. I really screwed this up. I let you down. And I think it's really important as a coach, as a mentor, as a leader, to also have that vulnerability to say, hey, like, I don't think I prepared you all well enough for this weekend's competition, and that's on me, right? Or, there's so many ways to be vulnerable in our sports particularly, but I think between purpose, safety, and vulnerability, like our core values are a really important intersection across those three pillars.
I think this is really interesting to hear the vulnerability piece in a sport where machismo, right, on our men's and women's side, it doesn't matter. Like our sport says you've got to be tough. If you don't win by complete domination, you got to go punish yourself with more sprints in the back room. Like we're always looking for the next thing that's better. What if our sport can turn the next thing that's better into more of a social justice? I know we're in early June in 2020 in America, and right now, social justice is the top right? We're living in a global pandemic, and social justice is more visible. And I, I'm not taking anything away from the pandemic, but I feel that right now is the time. I for some reason, I feel like we've got more momentum behind us. Um, what do we do with this? What do we do with this energy, whether it's a social, and it's all social justice, right? Being respectful and accountable for our words and actions. That's it, it's not just gender and sexual, it's race, it's so much bigger than just what we're talking about today with Athlete Ally, but it's all it's all fixed the same way, or moved in a better direction the same way, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the good news that I think COVID has provided is that, in a world in which sport is not actively happening, it's a great time to commit to getting better educated about those things which you might not feel all that equipped to deal with or talk about. And so I think, um, in our work, we try to define what we would call an ally commitment curve, right? And so it's this notion that everybody can do something, right? What's comfortable for me might not be comfortable for you. And that comfort level will change from environment to environment, right? I think we oftentimes forget that our character is very conditional, right? I might behave in such a respectful, thoughtful way when I'm in the presence of my employees, but I might go off on the weekend with my wrestling buddies and behave in a very different way, right? And so I think part of our challenge as a community is how do we create consistency of character, and how do we instill in our athletes the right ingredients so that we are behaving the same way, regardless of who we think is watching, regardless of who we think is listening. For to me, that's the end goal, because I think a lot of athletes, are more mindful about behaving the right way when they know coach is watching, or if there's a microphone or a camera in play. But when you have that, when you're given the anonymity of the internet, are you still commenting and acting in a way that you would be proud of? And so again, just kind of going back, to me, it's figuring out what's your most comfortable next step to being a better ally in your own life. And I think for a lot of people, that next step is just education. If there's a community or a social justice issue that you don't feel knowledgeable about, um, watch a movie about it, a documentary, a podcast. There are so many ways to consume information to get better educated, without spending, tons and tons of hours on it. So I would say pick the medium that feels right to you, and just commit to investing yourself in a little bit more education. And then I'd say from there, to me, it's also a lot about being proactive instead of reactive. I've talked to so many coaches who, I think, I give a speech and they would come up to me afterwards and say, I appreciate your remarks. I want you to know that I'm an ally. I say, awesome, great. Well, how has that shown up? What does that look like? Well, I've never said anything. I've never done anything, but I agree with what you're saying. And it's kind of like, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, does it actually make a sound? Well, kind of, but kind of not. And I think it's similar when it comes to creating an inclusive culture. Unless we're proactive and intentional about creating a welcoming environment, um, you're not an ally, right? Like, because I've talked to so many athletes who have stayed closeted their entire athletic career, only to come out after they graduate because nobody ever said the words. Nobody ever just said that proactive two-set, hey, you can always talk to me if you have an issue with a girlfriend or boyfriend. There's like very simple, non-preachy ways in which we can just create space for people to be themselves. Um, Wearing your beliefs on your sleeve. It's Pride Month, rainbow laces, wristbands, pins, mugs. There are many ways in which you can show your support for any community through symbols and gestures. Obviously we've had Blackout Tuesday where everybody was changing their profile picture. But how you show up, what you wear, what you share online are all statements of support. And so again, those are great nonverbal ways that you can be proactive and intentional. And then from there, I would also just say, if you're a coach, our greatest opportunity to define the culture of your team is on day one, right? I think a lot of coaches, I'll do trainings for coaches mid-season, and it becomes very awkward to like, you know, do you really want to stop, pause practice and talk about LGBT issues, or give a speech about something? Some coaches, yes, but some coaches, no. And so for me, the clearest opportunity to define behavior is on that first team meeting. And when you can really, again, say your core values. Hey, here's what we stand for. Here's what we believe in. Here are our expectations for one another. And then, not to just keep going on, but I also think it's really important that we clearly define the line as to what is not acceptable. I think that's another huge issue in our sports culture, is that we don't really clearly say what isn't okay. And so there's a lot of things that get said and done that we kind of look the other way, or, is there actually any repercussion for behaving in a particular way? I think we live in a day and age in which people maybe overreact when somebody makes a mistake. I think that's very problematic. But for me, if I'm on the daily with a group of athletes, a very easy thing to do is just draw your lines and make push-up punishment. 25 push-ups for every single infraction that defies your core values. I think that a lot of this, again, is about how do we help an athlete on their own internal journey to being more mindful of how they're showing up in certain spaces. And so your job as a coach is to help your athletes have that thought of like, wow, maybe I should do this differently. Maybe I shouldn't say what I'm about to say. And so I think that there are those like kind of everyday ways in which we can do that. And for me as a wrestler, it was push-ups, which, weren't the worst thing in the world, but they made me think, right? They just implanted that idea in my head. So a lot of this is just about reconciling the difference between the intent of our language and actions and the impact of our language and actions. I know a lot of people don't intend to be hurtful or harmful, but the impact is that we have a sports space that's not as welcoming as it could be. So I hope those are some specific things that maybe a coach could do, an athlete could do, to start being a little bit more intentional about creating an inclusive space.
That's amazing. And it's not about me saying something and you hearing it the way I send it. It's about me sending it in a way where you can absorb it and appreciate it and understand it, right? We have to be so intentional with our communication, and that can be scary, but being vulnerable, admitting when we're wrong, can be so liberating and freeing, because you're like, why do I feel lighter? Why do I feel better that I expressed my vulnerabilities? Because when we suppress those things, there's unhealthy repercussions from that, right?
Yeah, I also want to add, if you're a coach who's ever in a situation in which maybe an athlete comes out to you, or you feel like you're put in a position where you're expected to know the right course of action, I want you to know that it's okay to say you don't know. I think, as a coach, I oftentimes, when my feet are to the fire, I'm like, I need to always know the answer. I need to always know what we should be doing right now. When it comes to social justice issues writ large, it's sometimes better to say you don't know, because then you can say, you know what, I've never had to deal with this before. Honestly, I don't know what the right answer is, but I know there's this great community organization that does this work on a daily basis. Let me reach out to them and I'll get back to you, right? Versus trying to force a solution or an answer that's incorrect might actually do more harm than good. Especially when it comes to, an athlete who comes out to you might not be out to their parents, right? There are these sort of spheres of athletes coming out, which again, like, you can do a lot of damage, a lot of harm, if we're not thoughtful about how we address certain issues. So in the same vein of vulnerability, be okay not knowing the answer, and sort of pausing and finding the right answer before you try to offer advice.
It's great. And you do this now. This is your job. This is your organization. You do outreach. If our folks out there that are listening to this want you to come and speak with their group and get more of this information, we're going to make sure that the web link for the course is on here several times throughout the show. But how do we reach you, and And what does that look like? How do we go about that first step about contacting you and your organization so we can get some good discussions going?
Sure. So I'll just say Athlete Ally in general, we do three specific things as an organization. So we provide LGBTQ education to coaches, athletes, administrators, really anybody who wants to know more about the issues impacting the LGBTQ community, how you can be a better ally. We try to offer those resources. So you mentioned our curriculum, Champions of Inclusion. That's a free online course for anybody who wants to take it. My goal in this is to remove whatever barriers there might be to a coach receiving this information. So if that's a webinar, an in-person training, we're going to continue to be trying to invest in more online coursework, so that you can take it at your own leisure. So that's sort of pillar one, and we're happy to be a resource. And then, as a fellow wrestler, like, I want our sport to be the best, the most inclusive. I want it to be the gold standard of culture. And if there's anything that I can do to help to that end, like, please let me know. The second piece of our work is around sport policy. So we help teams, sport governing bodies, make sure that they adopt the most inclusive policies possible. We do an annual report at the NCAA level where we actually rank college athletic departments on their LGBTQ policies. So this September, it's called the Athletic Equality Index. We'll be issuing a report of every Division I school. And so it's not about your culture. It's not about your climate. It's just like, hey, here are the 8 policies that you should have. Do you have them? Non-discrimination policies, fan codes of conduct. There's just sort of a list of policies that are best practice. And, it's our hope that we get to a place where there's policy uniformity, that every sporting space has the same policies, so that if you're a young kid who's a member of the LGBTQ community, your experience is no different from state to state, school to school. The policies that support you should be the same. So happy to look at policies, audit policies, help you think through what's the right policy for your community, because I know not everybody's in the same place. And we're all on a journey on this. So it's just, how can we help you put in place a policy that's better than what's there today? And then the third piece of our work is athlete activism. So we want to help more athletes speak out and use their platform with a purpose. We have over 400 Olympic, Paralympic professional athletes who are ambassadors. We have 30 Athlete Ally chapters on college campuses. So, if there's an athlete out there who you think might want to get involved with us, we'd love to help them. If there's an athlete who you think might want to come out, we can also help connect them to other LGBTQ athletes who have gone through it. So it's really about building a network of like-minded athletes who support one another, are there for one another, to, again, use their platform in as effective a way as possible. You can find out more about Athlete Ally at athleteally.org. Please feel free to email me, hudson@athleteally.org. All the social medias, follow at Athlete Ally, just to, keep up to date with what we have going on.
This is great. From what you've done for your commitment to really living what wrestling's about. And it's being inclusive. Anyone can wrestle. We say it. And now it's time for us to walk the walk as an organization. If we have been slow in our sport to walk that walk, it's in our face right now. It's time for us to jump up and start taking those steps, as slow as they may be, or as big a leap as we want to take. Now's a good time.
Yeah, when I first started Athlete Ally, I didn't really know what I was doing, because I was just out of college, never started an organization. And I asked this friend who had been an activist for 40 plus years, I said, what does it look like to fight for social change? And he said, Hudson, I want you to imagine yourself standing at the edge of a cliff. At the bottom of that cliff is the ocean, and beyond that is the sunrise. And he said, when we stand up and fight for the things we believe in, we take one step closer towards that edge. It gets a little bit unsure, a little bit insecure, what people might say, how they might respond. But when you're fighting to make the world a better place for the people in it, it's your responsibility to go towards the fear, to stand on that edge. And when we are in this place, I can promise you all 2 things. The first is that from this place, there can be nobody who stands in front of us. And the second is that it then becomes our responsibility to describe that sunrise to everybody who stands behind us. And for me, that sunrise is the possible. It's what the future of wrestling looks like. And I really believe that if everybody who's in a position of power chooses to go towards the fear and like stand on that edge, we're going to make that sunrise a reality. So I think that I hope that this interview is a part of that process for your members. And yeah, I'm just excited to help you all go towards the fear in whatever way that is.
Amen. Hey, thank you, Hudson Taylor from Athlete Ally, from all of us at USA Wrestling, Moments Off the Mat. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your work. And thank you for helping us be a little better today.
Thanks so much.
I'd like to thank Hudson Taylor, our special guest today, and all of the folks at Athlete Ally that do so much great work. On behalf of all of us at USA Wrestling, Moments Off the Mat, thanks for what you do for our kids. Take care.